Hello, my beautiful Libra, and welcome. I'm truly happy you're here today. Before we begin, just take a slow breath and allow yourself to settle into this moment. If this reading resonates with your heart, hold on to it. If part of it doesn't, it's perfectly okay to let it drift away. Every journey unfolds differently, and today we're simply listening to the energy that wants to speak. As I begin laying out your cards, Libra, something feels unusually quiet, not peaceful quiet, more like the kind of silence that becomes heavier every single day until someone can no longer carry it. The very first card appearing is the Nine of Swords, and it immediately draws my attention towards someone whose mind doesn't seem willing to rest. It feels like this person has replayed conversations with you countless times. They keep returning to moments they wish had unfolded differently. Maybe they wonder why they said what they said. Maybe they regret what they never said at all. Whatever happened between the two of you, it doesn't feel forgotten. If anything, it feels like it has become louder inside their own heart than it ever appeared on the outside. Yeah, this doesn't feel like someone who simply moved on without looking back. It almost feels as though every attempt to distract themselves eventually circles right back to you. They might stay busy during the day, they might smile around other people, they might convince themselves that enough time has passed. But when everything grows quiet, your energy somehow finds its way back into their thoughts again. Not because they're trying to force it, but because something inside them still hasn't found peace. As I continue laying down the cards, judgment quietly steps into the reading, and everything begins to shift. There is a sense that this person has been seeing your connection through completely different eyes recently. It feels less like they're defending themselves now and more like they're questioning themselves. Instead of asking what you should have done differently, they're beginning to ask what they could have done differently. Okay, that's a very different place to be emotionally. Sometimes life creates enough distance for pride to become much smaller than honesty. It almost feels like time has softened the walls they built around their emotions. Experiences they've had since the separation may have changed their perspective. Situations that once seemed so important suddenly don't seem important anymore. The things they once justified now seem much harder to explain to themselves. That realization isn't necessarily comfortable. Actually, it feels quite overwhelming. The next card, the Four of Cups, carries a hesitation that is almost impossible to ignore. Because even though this person may be thinking about reaching out, they're equally afraid of what happens after they do. What if you don't answer? What if you're polite, but emotionally distant? What if you've already closed the chapter they are only now beginning to understand? Those questions seem to follow them everywhere. It feels like they imagine every possible outcome before even typing a single word. They may open a message, stare at the screen for several minutes, then quietly close it again. They might convince themselves they'll try tomorrow instead. Then tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes another month. Oh my God, fear has a strange way of disguising itself as patience. The final card arriving here is the Two of Wands, and suddenly the energy begins leaning forward instead of backward. There is movement here. Not dramatic movement, not impulsive movement, more like someone standing at a crossroads, realizing they can't remain exactly where they are forever. It feels like they're beginning to search for a reason. Not a grand declaration, not an emotional speech, just a reason. Maybe asking about something practical. Maybe sending a birthday wish. Maybe mentioning something that reminded them of you. Maybe finding the smallest opening that doesn't feel overwhelming. Because deep down, it seems this person isn't looking for the perfect conversation. They're looking for permission to begin one. Libra, what's fascinating is that the energy doesn't feel driven by guilt alone. Yes, regret seems present. Reflection seems present. But underneath all of that, there is something much quieter that continues pulling them toward you. It's almost as though the silence itself has become heavier than the possibility of hearing an answer they may not like. And that's why this reading feels different. Because the distance between thinking about reaching out and actually reaching out may be growing smaller than either of you realizes. Still, as these cards settle, one feeling remains stronger than all the others. Whatever words they've been holding inside their heart, They're no longer just about saying, "I'm sorry." The Justice card settles into the center of this reading, and the energy immediately becomes quieter. Not because the feelings have faded, but because they seem to have become more honest. It feels like this person has reached a place where blaming circumstances no longer brings them peace. They're beginning to understand that healing sometimes starts with taking responsibility, even when doing so feels uncomfortable. There's a sense that they've spent a long time trying to justify their choices, but lately, those explanations don't seem to satisfy their own heart anymore. It almost feels like they're imagining what it would be like to sit across from you without any defenses. No pretending. No trying to win the conversation, just speaking from a place that is more genuine than they've allowed themselves to be before. Whether that moment ever happens is impossible to know, but the desire for honesty feels stronger than it once did. Okay, something else is catching my attention. The Page of Pentacles appears, and the atmosphere softens. Whatever this person is considering, it doesn't seem dramatic or theatrical, it feels surprisingly simple. A message asking how you've been, a small comment about something that reminded them of you, maybe even a reason that seems almost ordinary on the surface. They don't appear to be searching for the perfect words anymore. Instead, they seem to be searching for words that feel safe enough to say out loud. Sometimes people believe they need one extraordinary moment to repair everything. This energy feels different. It feels like someone hoping one small step might eventually lead to another. Because deep inside, it seems they understand that trust isn't rebuilt through promises. It's rebuilt through consistency, through showing up differently than before, through allowing actions to slowly speak where words once fell short. Yeah, that feels important. As the cards continue unfolding, the Page of Swords quietly enters, and I can't ignore how curious this energy feels. There is a sense that this person still notices you, even from a distance. Maybe they pause a little longer whenever your name appears somewhere unexpected. Maybe they wonder how you're really doing beyond the smile you show the world. Even if communication has been absent, it feels like their attention hasn't disappeared. They're trying to understand the version of you that exists today. Not the person they remember, the person you've become, because something tells me they realize time changes people. They're aware that life doesn't stand still, and perhaps one of their greatest fears is discovering that you've grown into someone who no longer needs them in the same way. Oh my God! Vulnerability has a quiet voice, doesn't it? The more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like they're questioning whether they still have a place in your world. Not because you've pushed them away, but because too much time can sometimes create stories inside our minds that aren't necessarily true. The final card here, the Queen of Cups, brings such a gentle presence into the reading that everything seems to slow down. It feels like this person keeps returning to the emotional safety they experienced whenever they were close to you. Maybe it wasn't something either of you spoke about openly. Maybe it was simply the way conversations felt easier. The way silence didn't feel uncomfortable. The way your kindness gave them room to breathe. They're beginning to recognize that those moments were much more valuable than they realized at the time. There is a feeling that they miss the version of themselves they became when they were around your energy. They may not have appreciated that sense of calm before, but distance has a strange way of revealing what truly mattered. It seems they're discovering that peace isn't something they can easily replace. Libra, this doesn't feel like someone whose only goal is hearing the words, "I forgive you." It feels much deeper than that. There is a quiet hope that perhaps one conversation could become the first stone laid on a path toward rebuilding something that was never fully understood while it was still there. Whether that path opens or not remains unwritten. What feels more noticeable is how their emotions are no longer staying neatly organized inside them. Every time they come a little closer to making a decision, those carefully controlled feelings seem to grow stronger, more restless, and much harder to keep hidden. The Knight of Cups steps forward so naturally that it almost feels like someone's heart has grown tired of hiding behind silence. There is a softness here that wasn't present before, a willingness to feel instead of constantly analyzing every emotion. It seems this person has spent so much time trying to keep everything under control that they forgot feelings rarely follow rules. The more they tried to push them aside, the more persistent they became. What catches my attention is how this energy doesn't feel impulsive. It feels thoughtful, almost gentle. There is a sense that this person keeps imagining what it would be like to approach you differently this time. Not with walls, not with uncertainty disguised as confidence. Just, honestly, maybe they've even pictured the conversation more times than they'd like to admit. How would you look at them? Would your expression soften? Would you simply listen? Would there still be a little space left in your heart for them? Yeah. Those questions seem to follow them everywhere lately. As I continue laying the cards across the table, the death card appears, and something inside this connection feels as though it's quietly shedding its old skin. It doesn't seem to be asking either of you to return to what once existed. Instead, it feels like an invitation to leave behind the version of this connection that carried misunderstandings, pride, or fear. Because it seems they've realized something important. If they ever have another chance to stand in front of you, they don't want to arrive as the same person who walked away, or the same person who stayed silent. There is a quiet determination growing inside them. Not perfection, just growth. Oh my God, sometimes change doesn't announce itself with loud words. Sometimes it begins when someone finally admits they don't want to keep repeating the same patterns anymore. That realization feels incredibly personal. Almost sacred. It feels like they've started noticing habits they never questioned before. Moments where fear made decisions instead of love. Times when protecting themselves ended up creating even greater distance. None of this seems easy for them to face, but there is a feeling that looking away isn't possible anymore. The next card, the Queen of Swords, brings an entirely different emotion into the reading. Suddenly, beneath all this courage, another feeling quietly appears. Worry. Not worry about themselves. Worry about you. There is a sense that they wonder whether your heart has become more protected since everything happened. Maybe they imagine you've learned not to trust so easily anymore. Maybe they believe you've become stronger precisely because of what you've been through. And strangely enough, they admire that strength, even if it frightens them. They don't seem afraid because they think you're cold. They're afraid because they respect your boundaries now in a way they may not have before. It almost feels like they're asking themselves whether they've already missed their opportunity. Whether too much time has passed, whether healing has carried you somewhere they can no longer reach. Libra, I don't think this fear is pushing them away. If anything, it seems to be making them slower, more careful, more intentional. Every possible word is weighed before it's imagined. Every possible outcome is considered before a decision is made. They don't appear interested in rushing toward you simply to ease their own conscience. It feels more like they genuinely hope that if they ever return, they do so with enough emotional maturity to protect what was once so fragile. The final card resting here is the Two of Cups, and the atmosphere changes again. Everything softens. All the noise inside their mind seems to fade for just a moment, leaving behind one simple feeling they can no longer explain away. Connection. Not the kind built only on memories. Not the kind created by loneliness. Something much quieter than that. It feels like there are moments when they unexpectedly think of you, and instead of remembering a specific conversation, they remember how they felt around you. Safe enough to laugh. Comfortable enough to be themselves. Inspired to imagine a future they rarely allowed themselves to dream about before. Those moments seem to arrive without warning. A familiar song, a familiar street, a random scent carried by the wind. Life keeps placing gentle reminders in front of them, and each one quietly asks the same question. What if this connection still deserves another chance to be understood? Whether they have an answer yet is difficult to say. One thing feels much clearer. The closer they move toward the possibility of seeing you again, the more carefully they seem to be planning every step before they allow themselves to appear. The Two of Pentacles quietly takes its place, and it almost feels as though this person is standing between two versions of themselves. One side keeps saying, "Reach out before it's too late." The other whispers, "What if you only make things worse?" That inner conversation seems to repeat itself over and over again. Every time they think they've finally made up their mind, another doubt quietly slips in. It feels like they've written messages they never sent, deleted words that once felt important, started conversations in their imagination that never reached the real world. Maybe they've typed your name into their phone more than once, only to lock the screen before pressing send. Maybe they've looked back at old conversations, wondering whether there was a sentence they misunderstood or a moment where everything could have gone differently. Yeah, this doesn't feel like hesitation because they don't care. It feels like hesitation because they care much more than they're comfortable admitting. The energy shifts gently as the Six of Pentacles appears, and suddenly their focus seems less centered on themselves. There is a growing awareness that every relationship needs more than feelings alone. It needs balance. It needs listening. It needs two people willing to meet somewhere in the middle. Something tells me they've been asking themselves questions they never considered before. Did I truly hear what Libra was trying to tell me? Was I too focused on protecting myself? Did I expect understanding without offering enough in return? Those questions don't seem to have immediate answers, but they feel sincere. Okay, that's beautiful in its own quiet way. Because it seems they're no longer hoping for a conversation where they can simply explain themselves. They may actually want to understand your experience too. They may want to know what those silent days felt like for you, what you carried without saying, what you needed that perhaps never reached their ears. There is something very human about this energy. Not perfect, just willing. The Hermit enters the reading almost like a candle being lit inside a dark room. Everything becomes calmer, slower. It feels as though this person has spent more time alone than most people around them realize. Even when surrounded by others, there seems to be a part of them that has quietly stepped back from the world. Sometimes solitude isn't chosen. Sometimes it arrives because the heart needs space to hear truths that are impossible to hear in the noise. It seems they've been learning more about themselves than they ever expected. They're beginning to recognize old fears that shaped their choices, patterns that followed them from one chapter of life into another, emotional walls they once believed were protecting them, but may have also kept genuine love at a distance. Oh my God, growth can be surprisingly lonely. There are moments when becoming more honest with yourself means sitting with emotions you've avoided for years. It feels like this person has been doing exactly that, not because someone forced them to, but because something inside them no longer allows them to keep pretending everything is fine. The final card resting here is the Five of Pentacles, and its presence carries a quiet ache that is difficult to ignore. There is a sense that the distance between you feels much larger from their perspective than it may actually be. Every day that passes seems to convince them that reconnecting could become more difficult. Every unanswered possibility grows heavier inside their mind. It almost feels like they're standing outside a door they once walked through so naturally, wondering whether they're still welcome to knock. What if you've found peace without them? What if you've built a beautiful life that no longer has room for this unfinished story? Those thoughts seem to visit them more often than they'd like. Yet beneath that loneliness, another feeling quietly survives. Hope. Not loud hope, not confident hope, just enough hope to stop them from giving up completely. Libra, I don't think they're searching for the perfect speech anymore. It feels like they're searching for one honest beginning, one conversation where neither of you has to pretend to be stronger than you really are, one moment where truth matters more than pride. As these cards settle together, another energy begins moving beneath the surface. Something outside their careful planning seems to be shifting. It feels unexpected, almost impossible to schedule or control. Whatever has been keeping them frozen may not hold them much longer, and that change could arrive far sooner than they ever anticipated. The Tower arrives with an energy that feels impossible to ignore. It doesn't necessarily feel dramatic on the outside, but inside this person's world, something seems to be shifting in a way they can no longer control. It almost feels like a belief they've carried for a very long time is beginning to fall apart. Maybe they once believed they had endless time. Maybe they convinced themselves that waiting was somehow safer than risking rejection. But lately, that story doesn't seem to comfort them anymore. There is a sense that life itself has been asking difficult questions, questions they can no longer avoid. What truly matters? What are they protecting by staying silent? And what are they losing because they refuse to speak? Sometimes it isn't another person who changes us. Sometimes it's one unexpected moment, a conversation, a dream, a reminder, watching someone continue living beautifully without us. Whatever this turning point looks like, it seems to have reached much deeper than simple regret. It feels like something has awakened them to the possibility that not making a choice is still a choice. Okay, that's a powerful realization. As another card settles into place, the Ace of Swords carries a completely different vibration. The emotional fog that surrounded this connection for so long seems to be clearing, little by little. There is a quiet determination growing inside this person. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels intentional. They're no longer imagining dozens of different conversations. They're beginning to imagine one honest conversation, one where they don't hide behind excuses, one where they don't blame circumstances, one where they simply tell the truth as they understand it today. Yeah, truth has a different weight when someone has spent enough time avoiding it. It feels like they may finally understand that honesty isn't only about admitting mistakes. Sometimes honesty means admitting how much someone has meant to you all along. It means acknowledging the impact another soul had on your life, even if you didn't recognize it while everything was unfolding. There is something beautifully vulnerable about that. The King of Swords enters quietly, bringing an energy that feels calmer than before. This isn't the same person who reacted from confusion or fear. At least, it doesn't seem that way. There is a growing desire to communicate with clarity instead of emotion alone. That doesn't mean they no longer feel deeply. If anything, it feels like they've learned that overwhelming emotions don't always create meaningful conversations. Sometimes speaking slowly, listening carefully, and choosing honesty over defensiveness accomplishes much more. Oh my God. Emotional maturity often arrives after we've experienced the consequences of avoiding it. It feels like they're becoming more willing to hear your perspective without immediately trying to defend themselves. They may not agree with every memory. They may not remember every detail the same way you do. But there is a sense that understanding has become more important than being right. That feels significant, because connections rarely heal through winning. They often heal through listening. As I look at the final card in this part of the reading, the Six of Swords brings a feeling of gentle movement. It doesn't seem to promise that everything suddenly becomes easy. Instead, it carries the quiet hope that two people can choose to leave behind unnecessary weight. Not forgetting, not pretending nothing happened, simply deciding that the past doesn't have to control every future conversation. Libra. It almost feels like this person has grown tired of carrying emotional baggage that no longer serves either of you. They may be realizing that some misunderstandings were never meant to become permanent walls. Some silences lasted longer than either heart truly wanted. There is a feeling that peace has become more attractive than pride. Connection has become more meaningful than distance. Understanding has become more valuable than winning. Whether they reach out tomorrow or sometime later isn't something these cards insist upon, but they do seem to suggest that something inside this person has already crossed a line they cannot uncross. Once someone truly sees the truth within themselves, it becomes very difficult to return to pretending they never saw it. And perhaps that's the most important shift of all, because it feels like the conversation they've been quietly preparing for may not end with an apology. There is a sense that once those first words are finally spoken, an entirely different chapter could begin unfolding between the two of you. The Lover's card settles gently into this final part of the reading, and everything seems to become quieter again. Not because the emotions have disappeared, but because they finally feel understood. There is a sense that this person has stopped asking themselves whether this connection mattered. That question doesn't seem to exist anymore. Instead, it feels like they're asking what they're willing to do with everything they've finally come to realize. That's a very different place to stand. It seems they're beginning to understand that some people enter our lives for a reason that cannot always be explained with logic alone. Some connections continue living inside the heart, long after distance, silence, or time have tried to convince us otherwise. Whether that means reconciliation or simply deeper understanding is impossible to know. But it feels like they've stopped trying to dismiss what this connection has awakened inside them. There is something beautifully humbling about finally accepting that another soul changed your life, without resistance, without excuses, just quiet acceptance. The Empress appears beside the lovers, and the energy softens even more. It feels like the way they see you has changed. Perhaps they once noticed your kindness without fully appreciating it. Perhaps they admired your strength without realizing how much comfort it brought them. But now, there is a sense that they're seeing the bigger picture. They're remembering the way your presence made ordinary moments feel peaceful, the way conversations seemed to slow the world down, the way your energy encouraged them to become a better version of themselves without demanding that they change. Yeah, that kind of influence isn't easily forgotten. It almost feels like they're no longer looking at you through the lens of what happened between the two of you. They're seeing you through the lens of gratitude, even if there were misunderstandings, even if there was pain. There seems to be a growing appreciation for everything this connection quietly taught them about love, vulnerability, and themselves. Oh my God, gratitude has a way of softening even the hardest memories. Still, the Four of Pentacles reminds us that healing is rarely a perfectly straight road. There is a sense that this person continues to protect parts of their heart, not because they wish to stay distant, but because they've learned how deeply disappointment can hurt. They seem to want closeness, while also fearing the possibility of losing it again. That conflict feels incredibly human. Maybe they wonder whether opening up completely makes them vulnerable. Maybe they worry that one conversation could either rebuild hope or quietly close the door forever. Those possibilities seem to exist side by side inside them. Even so, something feels different now. Fear no longer appears to be making every decision. It's simply walking beside them. The Knight of Pentacles brings a steady rhythm into the reading. This card doesn't rush. It doesn't promise dramatic gestures or overnight transformations. Instead, it carries the feeling of someone choosing to move carefully because what they're moving toward genuinely matters. It seems this person would rather take one sincere step than 10 uncertain ones. If they reach out, it may not be with perfect words. If they apologize, it may not erase every hurt. If a conversation begins, it may not answer every question immediately. But there is a sense that authenticity has become far more important to them than appearing confident. Libra, sometimes the strongest beginnings are surprisingly quiet. A simple greeting, an honest question, a heartfelt acknowledgement. Those small moments often carry more truth than grand declarations ever could. The final card resting over this reading is the Star, and its presence feels less like an ending and more like the first light appearing before sunrise. It doesn't seem to promise a specific outcome because every heart still carries its own free will. Instead, it gently reminds us that hope often returns in the smallest ways. Sometimes healing begins with a conversation. Sometimes it begins with forgiveness. Sometimes it begins with simply being willing to listen. Whatever this connection becomes from here, it feels like both hearts have been changed by the journey itself. The silence has taught lessons. The distance has revealed feelings that once remained hidden. The waiting has uncovered truths neither of you may have fully understood before. Perhaps that's why this reading feels so peaceful as it comes to a close. Not because every answer has appeared, but because there is a sense that something real has finally found its voice. Libra, if these messages found their way into your heart today, take only what resonates and leave the rest behind. Trust your own intuition above everything else, because your inner wisdom will always understand your path better than anyone else can. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You are truly appreciated, and I hope today's reading brought you a little clarity, a little comfort, and perhaps a little hope. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again in the next reading. Bye for now.